All right, so I have a problem. I have a trip coming up, a family trip, not a photography trip, and I do still want to take my camera. I'm going to the Everglades in Florida, which is one of the biggest national parks in the United States. And so the problem is though that we wanted to take a budget airline, and the budget airline means that you're paying for every single thing. So the base cost is pretty low, but you pay for seat selection, you pay for a carry-on bag and things like that. So anything you want to add on, you have to pay for it. How do I take enough gear, or what gear do I take to make sure that I can make the most out of my trip with photography, but also still, obviously, it's a family trip. So taking the time to spend the time with the family and not be distracted by just photography and just combine it all together. And so obviously I would want to take the big bag, but if I can only bring one backpack on with me, which has to fit under the seat and has to fit all my clothes, then this becomes a little bit of a problem because the dimensions don't match up, and those budget airlines are pretty well known for being very strict with dimensions. I've decided to just take my normal laptop bag, stuff that I can put my clothes in as well as my gear. And so the question becomes, what do I take? Obviously, I want to take my camera, but the tripod, which I have here, is pretty big even when I collapse it. So that's not gonna happen. And so I want to divide this video into two parts. One, which will talk about what I think right now I should be taking, what the problems are, how I'm thinking of solving them. And then when I come back from the trip, I'll kind of reflect on what the actual problems I faced were and whether or not I would do anything differently. So right now, when I'm packing for the trip, I think I'm definitely going to take this camera, but because I'm not taking my tripod, I am going to remove the L bracket. I'm not going to be using a tripod. I'll probably just be holding it. We don't plan on going on very long hikes either, so shouldn't be that big of a deal. Now, one thing that is important to note is that Everglades are pretty well known mostly for their wildlife. And so when I'm trying to do wildlife, I'm most likely going to be using my Tamron 28-200 lens instead, because it allows me to zoom in much closer to the alligators that I don't want to get anywhere near. This will become the main lens, and I think I have these small pouch cases that I can actually take it in if I want to keep it a little bit more secure within the bag as well. Bought them, I guess, a while back, and I haven't had to use them too much because I bought this other bag soon after, but they come in really handy when I want to travel with just the way that I said before, which is in my other bag, but with the lens all captured. So yeah, this will come in pretty handy. This lens, I could see myself on the beach or somewhere else taking wide angle photos, but it's very unlikely, so maybe I'll probably leave this lens at home. I think I'll see if I can pack everything else first, including my clothes, and then I'll include this if necessary. Otherwise, I don't think I'll have room for it. And then I'll also be most likely be taking a bunch of different batteries, and yeah, I think definitely taking my circular polarizer, a lot of water, a lot of reflections. Might want to take this along, but if I want to use it effectively, I think I might also take this tripod. It's not the most sturdy tripod, obviously. It's really good for just random shots, and I think I might just end up using it like that. Who knows? I'll come back and see how it fares. But yeah, this is my only, I guess, small, sturdy-ish tripod. It has borne the weight of this before, and I've used this at the very beginning of this year when I was new to photography, before I had an actual tripod. But yeah, we'll see how that goes with this. Probably not going to be taking a lot of my other gear. Some of the gear, which I think, for example, like this power bank, is still pretty important, so we'll put that in the bag as well. A lot of this is flat, but yeah, I think the camera, the 28-200 lens, and the circular polarizer filter are the main things that I'll take, and a bunch of extra batteries, as well as this small tripod. The big tripod, unfortunately, will have to stay at home, and maybe this will make me give in and buy more of a travel tripod as well. I've been thinking about it for a while, but they're just so expensive. Peak Design has a carbon fiber tripod, but it's $600. It's light, and I really want to get it, but I just can't justify doing that. Let's check back after I come back from the trip and see how things went and whether or not I actually ended up using any of this gear and what I would have done differently. So now that I'm back, I want to kind of talk a little bit about what I did and how the trip actually went. So we started with Fort Lauderdale and then just drove down into Miami. We could have gone down directly to the beach, but we wanted to take some time and look at some of the art and culture of the area. So I got to take some really interesting street/architectural photography. Those weren't photos that I usually take. I was hand holding everything. I didn't really have a bag, so I had like a drawstring pouch with me. There were a couple of different interesting spots within Miami which had outdoor spaces as well, so we really enjoyed those. As the sun was setting, we kind of left as well because we had to head over to the hotel. So the next day we went over to the Everglades. For me, any national park that I go to, I want to get in early just because I want to avoid any of the crowds. And winter is kind of the peak season for Florida national parks just because you don't have to deal with all the mosquitoes or the massive humidity or really high temperature. I would ideally have liked to wake up during sunrise to go to some of the spots that I had scouted before going on the trip. But because I'm on a family trip, not everyone wants to wake up at sunrise. I could have gone out by myself, but I think based on what we wanted to do that day, it would have kind of thrown a wrench in that plan. So we ended up going out a little past sunrise and I was still able to get good light, but I couldn't really get any great landscape photos. I knew that going in, I might have to focus a lot more on wildlife photography and hand holding my camera a lot. So for the majority of my trip into the Everglades, I was hand holding the camera and I was rarely taking out my tripod. And on only one occasion, I think, I took out my tripod to try and compose photos and my wife was okay with just sitting in the car and waiting 20 minutes while I looked at this one spot where I really liked the light. From the Everglades, we went on an airboat ride, which was pretty neat. I didn't really get any good photos there. All the alligators or wildlife were pretty far away, or maybe it wasn't the right time. It was fun, but I didn't get as many nice photos as I would have liked. And the photos I did take, I ended up deleting because I just didn't really feel them. And so from there, we went over to the other side of Florida, which is Naples. And the sunset is a pretty big deal on that side of Florida. Usually you will see people all accumulate on the beach, on the pier to view the sunset. And I think it's a pretty neat tradition that people do. And so when we went to the beach, there were loads of people already there and loads more coming over from work or from home. And so we took our time to take different photos. There I had to use my tripod just because I knew that the light was getting a little bit dim. I wasn't really trying to capture any motion of the people or birds that much. I was more focused on the light and how it hit the pier, and for that, as the sun was setting, I really did need to use my tripod. And then I experimented a little bit with some compositions that I think worked out pretty well. There are room for improvements in those as well, but I think for a haphazardly drawn composition, it worked out pretty well. Area, we also did a lot of walking through the streets, through the shops, and I was hand holding my camera there as well. Didn't really take out the tripod much, so I was trying to focus a lot more on things that I found interesting happening on the street between people or different architectural spaces that I really liked. And then the next day we went back to the other side of Florida, near Hollywood, Fort Lauderdale, etc., and spent some time on the beach. It was getting a little bit stormy there, and so I tried to take some photos that kind of indicated that. It was really interesting because I was, again, still hand holding it. I didn't want to take my tripod out for the walks that we would go on, and so that meant that making makeshift tripods. So for this photo, I wanted to capture the stillness of the object, of the frame, but I also wanted to indicate that it was windy. So for example, the buckets, they were swinging in the wind, and if I tried to take a straight up handheld photo, I would have taken a more static approach and the buckets wouldn't look like they're swinging. So I had to put it down on something steady so that I could increase the exposure time, and that way I could capture the movement of the buckets, but because it was put on something steady like the sidewalk, I would be able to make sure that the part which isn't moving would still be sharp. Similarly for this other photo, the storm was coming in, the leaves were blowing everywhere. I wanted to capture this structure while it was standing, but with the added movement in the leaves. And that meant that I had to put the camera down somewhere steady and then lower the shutter speed so that I could capture the movement within the leaves and keep the build intact sharp by making sure that it was on a stable structure. At the end of the day, I think it was pretty nice because I did want to focus more on family time and be more intentional about that and want to take more pictures of my family rather than focusing on landscape photography. And in those moments when I wanted to focus a little bit more on landscape photography, I tried to temper my expectations a little bit as well as communicate pretty clearly with my family to make sure that we were all in agreement of how much time I would spend doing something, or basically that I would be able to spend enough time in that location to take a photo that I want. So funny thing is, I did end up taking my actual tripod in my backpack just because I really wanted to take it. And so what I did was I ended up disassembling all the different pieces, so the center for the ball head and the legs, and put them in my backpack, and they were able to fit there. Sure, it made my backpack a little bit more heavy, but I was able to cram everything in, and that worked out pretty well. I only ended up taking my Tamron 28-200 lens and my camera, as well as one other filter. So I think most of the choices that I made were pretty good. One thing I do regret not bringing along with me is this strap, because I ended up hand holding my camera so often. I really needed the strap to make sure that I wouldn't accidentally drop the camera, or that I could hang it around my neck when I was getting tired or something like that. So that was a mistake on my end. It really doesn't weigh anything. It really doesn't take up that much space either. I have no idea why I didn't take this along. But yeah, next time I'll remember that. But yeah, I think overall the trip went pretty well. I did focus on a lot of other types of photography that I usually wouldn't. The lighting wasn't as good as what I would like for all the different photos, but I think for street photography and architecture, I think it worked pretty well. Even for wildlife, I think if I could get the right background against the animal, I think it worked pretty well. It was still pretty fun to take images of a lot of different birds, a lot of different scenery that I normally wouldn't see. And hopefully this video helps you if you ever decide to go on a budget airline and don't know what to pack, as well as trying to figure out how much you should focus on landscape photography. I'll try and make a video later down the line talking a little bit about how I manage my expectations and what I think about traveling with family on trips where I would also like to take photos. So hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you next time.